They were standing by the glass entrance of the Transwest Logistics Solutions building on Spintex Road at 7:52 a.m. on a Thursday when he walked through the gate. Gerald Antwi saw him first. Gerald always saw him first. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gerald said, loud enough to carry across the car park, "our dedicated colleague has arrived." On foot. Again he raised his tea mug in a slow mock salute. A few people laughed. Two looked somewhere else. The man did not slow down. He adjusted the leather satchel on his shoulder and passed through the glass doors without once turning toward Gerald's face. He had been making this walk, 2 kilometers from his home in the Teshi neighborhood to this building on Spintex Road, every working morning for 14 years. Gerald had been making jokes about it for 11 months. What Gerald did not know, standing there with his tea mug and his audience, was that by the following Friday morning, every person in that car park would understand exactly who had been moving among them. Kofi Owusu Boateng was 61 years old, and his hands showed it the way honest work shows itself, not in weakness, but in record. His knuckles had a quiet resilience to them, and the edges of his right index finger and thumb carried the faint permanent stain of archival ink that accumulates over 14 years of handling documents that nobody else wants to touch. He was lean in the way of men who walk rather than sit, who eat once in the afternoon and once in the evening, who have not been still for long enough to thicken since they were young. He was 5'10" and 71 kilograms, the second number having been the same for 9 years, because nothing about his days had changed enough to alter it. He wore a navy blue trouser he had bought at Mokola Market in 2021 for 35 cedis, washed every Thursday, pressed every Sunday with a travel iron he kept on the top shelf in his bedroom, and a white short-sleeve shirt ironed at 6:15 each morning, with a precision that said the person ironing it was not racing anywhere, and had not been racing anywhere for a long time. His shoes were black Oxfords, resoled twice, the leather at the toe worn but treated with a wax that kept the surface from cracking. He had been using the same tin of wax for 3 years. He would use it until it was empty. His name was on an employee card that read K. Owusu Boateng, Records and Documentation. He sat in the third room on the left past the main staircase, a room that smelled of old paper and the faint chemical presence of a laminator nobody had used in 6 years. He kept the laminator because it had been there when he arrived, and he saw no reason to remove something that might still be useful to someone. The satchel belonged to his father. Brown leather, 23 years old. The left handle stitched twice with a dark thread that didn't exactly match the original, but held well enough. His father had carried it through the streets of Tama for 19 years, delivering repaired shoes from a small kiosk at the edge of the Ashaiman market. Shoes he had mended with tools he sharpened himself, on a stool he had made himself, in a space he paid 400 cedis a month to occupy until the landlord raised the price in 2008, and he moved to the roadside and carried on. His father had worn through 4 pairs of his own shoes during those 19 years. When he gave the satchel to Kofi on the morning, Kofi started his first job, not at Transwest, but at a small freight company in Tema. He said one thing: the distance between where you start and where you arrive tells people nothing. Only where you put your hands. Kofi kept the satchel through 3 jobs, 2 cities, and 14 years in the archives room at Transwest. He oiled it every other Sunday with a conditioning wax he bought from a cobbler woman who kept a small table on Batsuna Road. The same road he walked home each evening. He stopped at her table every day without fail, bought 1 packet of groundnuts, said "Thank you, Mama," and continued. She never asked how his day was. He never told her. They had the understanding of people who have stood near each other long enough to need no explanation. The satchel still smelled faintly of his father's cobbler wax underneath everything. He had never told anyone that. What he carried in the inner compartment of the satchel, no one at Transwest knew. When he reached in on a Wednesday morning to retrieve the quarterly archive index, a folded paper shifted to the side, and its top corner became briefly visible before he tucked it back. Printed on white paper in dark blue ink, a compass rose drawn inside a circle, the kind of mark that appears on institutional letterheads and legal covers in documents that require more than one signature before they become real. He folded the flap over it without looking up. No one was paying close enough attention to ask. The walking jokes had started 11 months ago on a Tuesday, when Gerald, arriving late by Tro and irritated about it, had seen Kofi on Botsana Road moving at his regular pace and felt something that could not quite settle into a name. "You walk every day?" he had asked. "Every day," Kofi had said. That was the whole exchange, but Gerald carried it back to the office the way people carry things they have not figured out yet. And by the afternoon briefing he was telling it to 2 colleagues, and by the following morning it had become something the junior staff laughed about, and by the end of that week it was established fact: the man in the archives room walked to work because he could not afford not to. It was the only explanation that made sense to the people who needed an explanation. Gerald Antwi was 34. He had come to Transwest after 2 years at a logistics firm in Kumasi and a business diploma from a college in Tema that he referenced once a year in conversation to establish geography. He wore pressed shirts he mentioned by price in team meetings. This one was 280 cedis, got it at the mall in East Legon, and kept a gold-plated employee ID lanyard he had bought for himself since the company issued plastic ones. He was not a cruel person by his own account. He was a performance. A man who had learned early that the fastest way to appear larger was to make the people near him appear smaller, and who had been so consistently rewarded for this that he had stopped noticing it was a method. He was diligent at his actual work. He processed shipping records with genuine accuracy and had expanded the freight tracking system in a way the CEO had once praised in a quarterly email. He was good at his job. He was also very practiced at the walking jokes. At the team briefing on a Friday 3 weeks into his campaign, when Kofi stood to present the Q3 archive audit, Gerald waited until Kofi had arranged his papers and then said, "To the room. Our colleague walked here to share this with us. I think that deserves full attention." 3 people laughed. 2 looked at the table. Kofi looked at his papers and presented 63 line items, all reconciled, 3 discrepancies flagged with their corrective notations. He sat down. He had not rushed a single sentence. A younger staff member named Kwame, 27, who had been at Transwest for 8 months and sat near the back of the room, said something under his breath to the person beside him. Gerald heard the word he used. By the following Monday, Kwame had been transferred to the early processing shift, 5:30 a.m. to 2:00 p.m., with no explanation attached to the transfer notice. The walk home on that Thursday took 49 minutes. Spintex Road at 5:14 p.m. Was its own particular climate, the diesel heat rolling off Tro's packed shoulder to shoulder with people going to Tema and East Legon, the hawkers moving between lanes with ice water sachets and plantain chips and phone chargers in bags slung over their forearms, the sound of several hundred car horns assembling themselves into a pattern that was almost rhythmic if you had been listening long enough. The pavement on the east side had a section where the concrete had broken in 2022 and been partially filled with gravel that shifted underfoot. Kofi stepped over the worst of it the same way he always did, 2 paces to the left, his weight redistributed without thinking. He had been walking this road for 11 years. He knew which section of pavement buckled in the rainy season and which market woman's stall sent coal pot smoke across the pedestrian path at around 5:20. and which hawkers sold the best groundnuts at the corner before the Batsana turn. He knew the exact smell of that corner. Roasted nuts and the faint sourness of an open drain 10 meters back and the diesel from the bus that parked overnight near the wall. Because he had passed it on 2,640 working days, and it had not changed. The city changed around the edges. The smell of that corner did not change. He reached the cobbler woman's table at 5:57 p.m. He bought 1 packet of groundnuts. He said, "Thank you, Mama." He ate them 3 at a time for the last half-kilometer to his gate. What he did not know was that earlier that same afternoon, at 2:11 p.m., Madame Akosua had set a small cup of peppermint tea on his desk. She placed it on the left side, next to the archive index, without knocking, without a word, and left before he looked up from his work. She had been the morning cleaner at Transwest for 22 years. She arrived every working day at 5:30 a.m. to sweep the corridors before the building had people in it. She had seen 3 CEOs come and go, 2 full restructurings, and the renovation in 2019 that removed the old reception desk she had cleaned around every morning for 11 years. She did not bring tea to anyone else's desk. She did not bring it again the following day. She brought it once, on that day after the briefing, and she offered no reason. Kofi drank the tea while he worked through the afternoon. He did not mention it to her when he passed her in the corridor at 4:45. He simply stopped, looked at her for 1 moment, and nodded once. The way you acknowledge a person who has understood something you did not say out loud. The following Wednesday evening at 7:35 p.m., Kwame was eating jollof rice and fried plantain at a small cafe near East Legan Junction when he noticed Kofi sitting at a corner table with a man he did not know. The man was perhaps 40 and a dark suit jacket, with a slim briefcase whose clasp carried a small embossed logo. A compass rose inside a circle, gold pressed on dark leather. Kofi had the satchel open on the table. He had taken out 3 documents and laid them flat. The other man was reading them carefully, turning the pages slowly, one at a time. At one point he produced his own folder and set it alongside Kofi's pages. Kofi was not eating. He was listening with the kind of attention that requires the rest of the body to become very still. Kwame finished his food and left without walking past the table. But he held what he had seen in his mind for 4 days, turning it the way you turn an object to find its weight. The HR manager, Pauline, called Gerald into her office on the 4th floor 7 days later. She was a careful woman who chose her language the way careful people choose tools, for the job, not for display. She said she wanted to ensure the team environment stayed constructive. She said certain dynamics could sometimes affect morale without anyone intending harm. She said she appreciated Gerald's energy and wanted to channel it in the most productive direction. Gerald nodded through all of it. He said he completely understood. He said he was sorry if anything he had said had been taken out of context, and that he would absolutely be more mindful going forward. At the Monday briefing, he said, "Without looking at anyone in particular, I want to acknowledge that humor in a workplace can sometimes land differently than intended. If I've said anything that caused anyone to feel uncomfortable, I want to say directly that I apologize for that." He looked around the room. A few people nodded. Someone clapped once, briefly, then stopped. Kofi was looking at the meeting agenda on the table in front of him. He did not look up. He did not nod. He turned a page of the agenda and waited for the first item to be called. 3 days after that, an email went to all staff from the CEO, Richard Asante. "We are pleased to inform all staff that the formalization of the Owusu Capital Management acquisition will be confirmed at an all-staff briefing on Friday, 10 a.m. The principal shareholder will be present. Please hold the time." Gerald forwarded it to a colleague with one line. Finally, let's see who actually owns this place. Madame Kosua was cleaning the shelf in the break room at 9:18 a.m. On the Thursday before the shareholder meeting, running a blue cloth along the edge of the shelf where 3 unclaimed mugs had accumulated a film of dust. Kwame found her there. He stood in the doorway for a moment, then came in and sat down at the small table. Madame Kosua, he said, what do you know about who's buying the company? She did not stop cleaning. She moved the cloth along the next section of shelf with the same speed she used for everything, not slow, not hurried, calibrated. That man, she said, has been part of this company longer than this company thinks. Which man? Kwame said. She set the cloth down on the edge of the shelf. She opened the small drawer under the counter, the drawer the break room had had since before any current staff member arrived, and took out a folded copy of the Ghana Business Review from February 2018. She put it on the table without explanation. The article was on page 14, 3 columns at the bottom below the main feature. No photograph. The headline read, Owusu Capital Management confirms stakes in 3 West African logistics firms. The body of the article detailed an investment group that had, over 11 years, acquired minority and then majority positions in freight and shipping infrastructure across Ghana and Nigeria. The managing director was named in the second paragraph, K. Owusu Boateng. Kwame read it twice. He looked at the name for a long moment. He looked at the corridor through the break room door, at the entrance to the archives room visible at the far end. Madame Kosua picked up her cloth. I've been in this building for 22 years, she said, folding the cloth once and then again. I have watched people say many things about many other people. I have seen those people be wrong in ways they never recovered from. She set the folded cloth on the shelf. The foundation does not worry about what the occupants think of the ground beneath them. Kwame said nothing. He left the break room with the Ghana Business Review folded in his hand, went back to his desk, and said nothing to anyone for the rest of the day. If this story is landing the way I think it is, if you can see where the ground is shifting beneath everyone in that building, subscribe now before we get to what happens in that boardroom on Friday morning. Because what comes next is the thing nobody in that office had the frame to prepare for. Kofi arrived at 7:47 a.m. on Friday, 13 minutes before anyone else from the senior team. He made his tea, not peppermint, but the dark Ceylon blend he kept in the second drawer of his desk, and drank it at the window with the satchel set on the chair beside him. The Compass Rose document inside it now, accompanied by 2 others in a brown folder. Outside, the palm tree at the edge of the car park moved slightly in the morning air. It had been there before he joined. He expected it would be there after he left. At 9:43 a.m., a navy blue Toyota Land Cruiser GR Sport, a 2022 model, the paintwork still carrying the depth of newness, pulled into the car park and took a visitor bay near the entrance. The man who stepped out was 38, tall and lean in the way that recalls his father's body 20 years earlier. He wore a suit made in London rather than bought from a rack, and he carried a slim black folder and moved through the glass doors without stopping at reception. The way people move through spaces they have been briefed on in advance. Gerald, at his desk near the window, watched the Land Cruiser park and straightened his lanyard. The boardroom filled at 9:58. Gerald had taken a seat near the left of center, positioned so he could see both the presentation screen and the door. Richard Asante arrived at 10:01 with 2 legal team members. Then, the man from the Land Cruiser. He took the chair at the head of the table without introduction and set the black folder in front of him. Then, 2 representatives from the National Investment Bank, the branch manager carrying a dark briefcase with a familiar clasp. Then Kofi, still in the white shirt, still in the navy blue trousers from Mokola Market, pressed that morning the same as every morning, the satchel on his left shoulder, the stitched handle visible at the seam. He came through the boardroom door at 10:04 and walked the length of the table to the far end, the other end from Richard Asante, and sat in the chair there. His son, at the head of the table, looked at him and nodded once. Gerald's pen rested against his notepad and did not move. Richard Asante said, "We are here today to formalize the transfer of principal ownership to Owusu Capital Management, which has held a majority stake in this company for the past 14 months. I want to introduce, and I understand this will be a surprise to most of you, and that is entirely appropriate, Misty, Kofi Emmanuel Owusu Boateng, incoming chairperson of the board, who many of you will know from our records and documentation department." Kofi opened the satchel. He set the brown folder on the table. He placed the 3 documents in front of him and looked at the room with an expression that contained nothing more than the particular steadiness of a man who has been waiting a reasonable length of time for something he was never uncertain about. He said, "Let us begin." 3 words. The room did not move for a full 2 seconds. The meeting ran 46 minutes. Emmanuel handled the legal documentation, the acquisition timeline, the equity transfer structure, the new board composition. The NIB branch manager confirmed the account arrangements. Kofi signed in 4 places. He countersigned twice where Emmanuel indicated and asked 2 questions. One about the rollout schedule for the new policy charter, one about the realignment of the client services team reporting structure. Both were answered in under a minute. Gerald asked no questions. His hands lay flat on the table. The reckoning, when it came, was institutional. Kofi did not address Gerald by name. He did not reference anything that had been said in team meetings or car parks over the previous 11 months. What he announced, in the same measured voice he had used to say, "Let us begin," was the Transwest Workplace Dignity Charter, a formal company policy, effective the following Monday, classifying any reference to an employee's personal transport, clothing, or physical appearance in a professional setting as a formal HR matter subject to documented review. He stated that the policy had been drafted with direct input from Pauline, who had flagged certain patterns to his attention. He stated that a mandatory orientation session would be held the following Thursday at 2:00 p.m. in this boardroom. He stated that he would be leading the session himself. Pauline wrote something in her notebook. 2 people near the middle of the table nodded. Gerald looked at his hands. On the following Tuesday, Ghana Business Daily ran a profile on the incoming chairperson of Transwest Logistics Solutions on page 6. Alongside the article was a photograph taken at the subject's home compound in Teshi, a building of modest size but well-maintained surfaces. Bougainvillea growing along the left wall in a line of deep red, a swept concrete yard, and visible through the open gate behind the subject, a 2022 Toyota Land Cruiser GR Sport in dark navy, and beside it a black Mercedes-Benz C-Class belonging to the NIB branch manager who had come that same morning to complete the secondary account transfer documentation. The man in the foreground wore a white shirt and navy blue trousers. He held a brown leather satchel at his side. He was not exactly smiling. He had the look of a person who had been asked to be still for a moment and was letting time pass around them without resistance, thinking about something that existed slightly behind the present. The headline read, "Quiet Builder, the Records Archivist, who was also the chairman." Gerald saw it at a kiosk on Spintex Road at 7:41 a.m. on Tuesday. He was buying a sachet of water before the shared taxi arrived. He picked up the paper because the bougainvillea in the background of the photograph looked like something he had seen before. The specific red of it, the way it grew in a straight line along a concrete wall, and the gate behind the man looked like a gate he had driven past 3 weeks ago on the way back from a site visit in Tama. He had seen the Land Cruiser and the black car parked outside that gate and thought briefly that it was probably a family compound with visiting relatives. He read the name under the photograph. He looked at the building behind the man in the photograph. He read the name again. He folded the newspaper in half. He put it under his arm. He paid for his water. He did not say anything when he arrived at the office at 7:58 a.m. He sat at his desk and set the newspaper face down to his left. At 8:06 a.m., Kofi came through the glass doors, satchel on his left shoulder, adjusted at the strap the way he always adjusted it once he was through the door. He walked past Gerald's desk the same way he walked past it every morning. He went to the archives room. He made his tea. He opened the window the standard 5 centimeters. He began his work. Gerald did not touch the newspaper again. Gerald Antwi thought the walk was the evidence of what Kofi did not have. What Gerald had not understood, and this is the particular cost of a mistake built on the wrong assumption, was that Kofi was not walking because he had no alternative. He was walking because his father had walked. Because the 2 kilometers from the Teshi neighborhood to the Spintex Road building was the same measure of distance his father had carried through the streets of Tema for 19 years in worn shoes on broken pavements, delivering repaired things to people who had almost discarded them. Because Kofi Owusu Boateng had started Owusu Capital Management in 2003 with 11 years of saved salary and his first freight investment in a company in Tema, and had spent the years since building quietly, in the direction nobody in the room was looking. Because the archives room, the room that smelled of old paper and the dead laminator, was the room that told the whole truth of a logistics company, if you knew how to read it. And Kofi had spent 14 years reading it. He walked because the walk was not something to be changed. It was the thing that kept everything else in its right proportion. There is a particular kind of error that comes from measuring a person by the part of their life that is visible from the road. You look at the shoes and believe you have understood the miles. You count what a person is carrying in their hands and forget to ask what they are carrying in everything else. You see the 2 pairs of trousers, the resold Oxfords, the brown satchel stitched at the handle, and you build a story around those details that feels complete, because it is consistent, and because nobody around you has challenged it yet. But some people do not build in the direction you are looking. Some people build in rooms that are not announced, over years that do not have a visible milestone. They have been building since before you had the language for what building is. They arrived before you did. They will still be there after the performance has exhausted itself. Kofi still walks to work, 4.2 kilometers, Tuesday through Friday, sometimes Monday if the morning is cool. The satchel still has the stitched handle. He still passes the cobbler woman's table on Botswana Road every evening at the same time. But now he buys 2 packets of groundnuts instead of 1. He sets the second packet on her table without asking whether she wants it. She takes it without thanking him. They have understood each other for long enough that the transaction requires nothing else. Leave your answer in the comments. If you had spent 20 years building something quietly, and the people standing next to you spent that same time assuming you had nothing, would you have told them? Or would you have let the morning arrive on its own? I want to read every answer. Leave it below. Subscribe for more stories about quiet builders, hidden foundations, and the people the world measures by the wrong things, until the day it no longer can. I'll see you in the next one.